Morning. Ooh, it's a little punchy. First of all, thank you and welcome. Great to be back in the building again. Got a great cast of individuals on the stage with me. They already handled the introduction, so we're going to skip the particulars. But again, we're going to try to make this make some sense. So we had a good sort of prep call, fireside chat, just related to this conversation. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. So Myles, Vik, I don't know that guy. No, just kidding. So we're gonna have like some great dialogue here. He knows I love him dearly. So listen, I think we're gonna start this by addressing the hyper-conflated drug marketing world. And I'm gonna use these merger of terms, okay, confused and inflated. And I think the confusion is someone said, hey, all the drug marketing seems to be on Hulu and Netflix and Peacock. And since my wife watches Lifetime, they got you too. But I think what we want to do is understand what level of complexity that creates for the healthcare practitioner when a consumer comes in with a flurry of information, as if they're super informed but probably misinformed, and what that leads them to in terms of the interaction, the conversation. And Bill, I'm going to kick it to you because I think one of the things you talked about was the volume of patients, the inundation, the speed of information. So we're going to zoom out a little bit. But I think in the HCP world, it's just like, how are they managing the market conversation, all the noise? So kind of take us through that, because obviously that's one of the critical things you have to look on the planning side and the agency side.
Sure. So thank you for having me again. The amount of information that a patient can consume is, based in the way that they're a consumer. I think we have a lot of partners here that work outside of the pharma landscape and probably can tell us a lot about content and what a consumer goes through. In a healthcare journey, there's a lot of milestones that a patient goes on that defines whether or not they have the curiosity or the confidence to ask a question when they go in the exam room. The exam room is such a sacred place for all of us. We can't force someone to ask a question. What I say a lot in conferences like this or to my team is that we work in influential marketing, right? We are influencers, right? We influence the conversation. We give them the information that's needed to drive that curiosity and drive the confidence that's needed that might change their life. The amount of content that we're producing as an industry is immense, and patients are overwhelmed. So it's trying to figure out, with that patient journey, with the individual diagnosis, within that category, what is going to actually drive the action? We spend a lot of time in market research, which is obviously a controlled test. But when we see it in real life, we spend a lot of time going through that data with patients and really trying to understand what are the one or two things that are going to sing, and trying to capitalize and scale on those. So that's where I think content and engagement really cross.
No, that was great. And, Myles, I think one of the things you talked about was with an aging population, let's just say the on-ramp of participating in healthcare is getting kind of congested. I mean, we're just having a flood of people who are moving into the space, and that's just symptomatic in just terms of population aging. So that creates a whole nother dynamic in management in the HCP realm when you could be talking about 2-3-fold around a given indication of disease state that it was in a previous era.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, it sort of goes to the title of the panel, it's this oversaturation, which you reference, Albert. I think there's a couple of things happening in a bit of a perfect storm. So yes, we have aging population, which is a good thing, beats the alternative. But we also have an excessive stress on the healthcare system, and we all saw this in the pandemic. And so if you think about, as marketers, how do we marry and unify our stories to cut through the noise to focus on what is the right message at the right time for patients and what is the right message at the right time for HCPs. And a typical HCP like in a emergency room, is seeing probably 40 patients a day. Then you think about the advent of technology and the evolution of the patient being at the center of their medical decisions. Not a new thing. We all can remember, those of us who are of a certain age, when WebMD came out in the mid-90s. So patient centricity is not a new thing. But we also now are dealing with excessive information wherever you go. You look at influencers who have more influence than maybe the old model of difference to, you went to, as Bill was describing, you went to your medical practitioner, you had a conversation, they really drove the conversation and the decisions. That model has changed. So now you're seeing a lot of information coming at patients and HCPs faster. Electronic health records is a classic example. More times than not, a patient gets their results ahead of the doctor getting them, and so that can send them down a rabbit hole of panic. So our jobs as marketers is to figure out how do we resist the traditional model that we've all been trained in, which is, and Bill alluded to a little bit, an output focus. So we're delivering a lot of content, and we're in a constant cycle of FOMO and risk averse as an industry. So we've all been to many of these conferences, and we've talked about AI, and somebody mentioned it's a good drinking practice. I would say the other one is Omnichannel. And so how do we make sure we focus on the right channels for our audiences and not be in every channel, because that's meaningless. And that gets into this problem we have with oversaturation.
Yeah. So before we get into Bill's statement of we are the influencers and yours about the speed of information, Vik, I want to throw it to you because, some of your background is, it's oncology, it's biosimilars, it's myeloma. I mean, we're talking about narrow domains where, as you said, our traditional advertising models, over the top, linear first, doesn't transact and translate. So take us through a lot of your perspective of how you have to look at the strategy of being in market when you're talking about an audience size you're targeting is 10,000 and not 10 million, 100 million like we see in other categories.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I work in rare cancer marketing at the moment, so it's a challenge to meet HCPs both at the academic level and the community level because they're not treating patients very frequently with the disease that we market our product for. And so on the HCP side, it's very tempting to be like, it's hard to reach these HCPs, but we've got all these programs being pitched to us with these high match list rates. Let's just do all of them and see what sticks. But in the end, that just gives the HCPs just too much information, and they get frustrated with getting email after email from 4 different vendors. So, what I've been working on now is just let's start small and do some test and learns and see what really drives the message with the different physicians we have, whether they're in the community, whether they're academic, and really also look at attribution models to determine the ROI, because we get a lot of metrics that show programs are working well, but what is really driving script load? So really working to start small with HCPs and figuring out what is driving conversion with them. And on the patient side, I mean, that's where I'm looking because I'm working in rare diseases, is leveraging AI to identify patients, because that's where it's really hard in rare disease to find the patients. You can't start out broad. You have to be very efficient with the model.
All right, so I'm going to double tap on that and stay with you for a second, because one of the things we talked about was this idea of remapping the channel strategy. I mean, look, you got influencers and creators. Some of this is out of bounds for pharma, but you got the targetability of CTV that matches mobile. I mean, the playbook is vast, but no one's talking about its precision within. So, if you were really to look at channels specifically, what are the ones that you have found looking at attribution, working your way back? Are we going to get the outcomes and these work, to the ones like, for us, that is just noise. Good for you all, have fun with it, but it's not something we can entertain. Like, what are some of the specifics you've seen?
I mean, it varies based on the disease category and the patient population size, but one of the things I've found is, I've worked at big companies, I've worked at small companies, some small companies that have not launched a product yet. And oftentimes they see television as being the way to introduce themselves. Yeah. And if there are competitors in the market, let's do a TV ad so we announce ourselves as the big player here. And not only can we do that, but we can also announce that we are a company and we're about to launch something. But even with connected TV, which is exciting because it's, compared to linear TV in the past 5 years that offers so much more targeting capabilities and data, you still have to think about the patient population size and the disease to really grasp if you're going to get an ROI from even connected TV.
Right. And I know, Myles, for you, you talked about the speed of information, like the speed gets to the patient before they even get into a doctor. So I think that starts to feed the dynamic of what we need to be in every channel. And I think one of the things you really reference is this rise of a citizen doctor. And you're now, all the drug advertisers making us be accountable for our stuff because we now all think we have something going on. We probably do. But help us understand the impact and decision model and how that means showing up in specific channels and channels that matter.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges that we have as an industry, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, is this pendulum swing between being risk averse and FOMO. And we constantly swing between these two things. And when we go to the FOMO side of things, we're always panicking about, our competitors are doing this, and we may not even be a competitor, but in our, other companies in our industry are doing this, so we should be doing it. We have a tendency to look at this sort of the consumerization that's happened outside of the industry, and then thinking, we need to follow that because everybody is being in this place, whether it's TikTok or whatever it may be. But Vik mentioned a little bit in his previous comment, go back to the fundamentals around what is the disease area you're focused on, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then determine what are the channels that make sense for that. Because we generally get into this sort of enamored with technology, and we want every single channel, and we want to be everywhere. And if you're in rare, ultra rare, as an example, the odyssey for a patient is 8+ years in their diagnosis. Right? So they are living with trying to solve this problem a lot longer than the typical HCP that may see 1 to 2 patients in a year. And so you have to think through what is the right mix to have. And for me, it's always about finding this balance of a unified approach. Right? As sort of frontline marketers, we were raised on, I'm focused on patient marketing, or I'm focused on HCP marketing. But the reality is both of those audiences are consuming information from the other audience. And so you have to develop a unified approach about how you tackle it. So one really simple example is if you're going to be marketing driving screening as an example for a diagnosis, and you're doing point of care marketing, well, you better make sure that you are also doing marketing to HCPs in a similar fashion. So if it's doing electronic medical records or health records and putting your messages out there, so you're not creating this adversarial situation where you're driving a lot of patients to an already oversaturated health system, to doctors who are already maxed out in their capacity, and then they're not able to help those patients. So it's really about stepping back and figuring out what are a couple of key channels that make sense for my audience. So it should always be, and this is my plea to you as marketers, it should be quality over quantity. Figure out those couple of quality channels that you want to go to, and then really amplify those, and resist this sort of, Vik mentioned this earlier, resist these top big vanity metrics numbers that we all get pitched. They're great, and they make great slides, and they make a great business case, but the reality is you've got to get people through that funnel.
I think we talked about it on the prep call, right? Is the shiny penny, right? A lot of marketers are like, I want to do that thing. I want the notoriety of doing that first, right? Thinking about the role of channel is so critically important, and understanding what that channel can actually produce for you. So utilizing your media partner to set really strong goals and KPIs, monitor them, and not be afraid to optimize. And I think we get into this place where we're trying to make things work, and we let them run too long before we actually cut the cord, or we decide to have an optimization conversation. We were talking last night at dinner about cutting channels completely off to just see what happens when you remove funding, and does it actually have an impact on your bottom line? I think it's really important for marketers to test and learn. And to your point about, FOMO, I think like we're so used to just trying to do everything that we're also afraid to try to make changes. So it's like, what is the data telling you, and how do you make sure you're pulling those levers in a timely manner to actually help you meet forecasts? Because everybody in this room has a goal hanging above their head. So at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we're in good partnership as an agency to a client or a partner who's working, in service to us.
Yeah, just the data point, cannot overemphasize this enough. Not all data is created equal. So it's another one of those, we throw this buzzword around. I'm not saying that's not what Bill was mentioning, but as an industry, we talk about data, data, data. What are you actually talking about, and what are you going to do with it? And so one of the key things you should be having in your conversations when you're getting data is from your whoever is providing it to you, is ask yourself this question. With this data, whether it's, hopefully I'm moving to information, knowledge, and wisdom beyond data, but with this data I'm getting, what questions am I able to answer? And if you cannot answer that question, go back to what is the problem I'm trying to solve, resist the temptation to sort of lead with technology and lead with tail wagging the dog. Because I will say, and I'll be provocative for a second here, we have a tendency to talk about data and the numbers we get for ROIs or whatever, and really what we're talking about is observational data, right? We're collecting all of this information, and we're going, oh, that's interesting, I observed this and that, but we don't actually make any decisions on it. So we have to move beyond this observational, traditional thinking we have in this industry to being more into insights. And that requires you to go back to fundamentals about what's the problem I'm trying to solve, and until I can answer that, then I cannot determine what channel I should use.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of moving beyond observation to things that impact execution. One of the things we got in discussion around was it seems that the patient advocacy conversation is missed in the channel strategy and the tactics. And, for you, Vik, I know one of the things you clarify was really the difference between patient strategy and advocacy. Because look, without the advocacy, whether it's for oneself or through organization, there isn't a whole lot of compliance, but there's still a whole lot of money in spending. So if you kind of take the audience through, in your experience, the strategy versus advocacy piece and how they sort of fit into the frame of the thinking. Because I think there's too much in this business of focusing on just B2B, forgetting the C, what we call the patient and the consumer eyes.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's with patient advocacy, obviously there are firewalls with branded marketing through patient advocacy organizations, but oftentimes you can find a sweet spot where it makes sense. So I worked on a drug called Revlimid, which was standard of care for multiple myeloma. And, advocacy, a lot of times senior leadership thinks with patient marketing, advocacy is gonna, wave the brand flag for us. They're not gonna do that. But when it's appropriate, most multiple myeloma patients are using Revlimid in the front line as a frontline treatment. So, we were able to work with advocacy organizations to have a patient speaker, a nurse speaker, go to patient support group meetings sponsored by the advocacy organization to just discuss using Revlimid and any questions you might have about side effects or, have that discussion. And so when there's a synergy with advocacy organizations, that makes sense. But I've also worked at smaller organizations where they think we've got to reach these hard to reach patients and let's just go full force with advocacy. But the truth is there's a lot more we can do with patient marketing to get to some of these hard to reach patients. Not all patients are involved with advocacy organizations, right. And with rare disease, oftentimes, they don't know, they're not aware of advocacy organizations, but with our marketing dollars, with our targeting, we have the ability to reach some of these patients who might not be connected in that way to advocacy organizations. So I think but they're definitely wonderful to leverage in terms of awareness, especially for unbranded campaigns.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's important in that is, Bill, you talked about what's the narrative pulled through in a patient strategy advocacy conversation, and you made this notion of living well. I think HIV has probably done it the best in the sense that HIV is not a death sentence anymore. It's a lifestyle change, a dietary change. Yeah, there's some pills you're gonna have to pop, but it's not the kiss of death like it used to be when it first hit the scene. But there are other categories that still need to learn from that. Obviously, the oncology realm is that. So talk to us about this idea of threading in the living well and the overall message arc that can make the difference in fusing this together.
Yeah, living well and living with. For a long time, I think advocacy, like when I sat on the brand side, we would use it as a way to generate content with patients who are living with and doing well and treating, or maybe not treating, but still looking for that right solution. So advocacy actually provides you with insight. It is good data to be able to help craft better messaging that's more tailored to the patient experience. And then if you are really using advocacy the right way, they're going to naturally advocate for you because they realize that you're paying attention, that you are actually changing your approach and you're leaning in. We used to do all of our campaigns, concepting, we used to run it through advocacy groups and say, hey, what do you think about this? Like, how do you think this would be received? What if we said it this way? What if we said it that way? And that really gave us a lot of feedback that, prior to finalization of production, we were able to actually have real life examples that made it feel more relatable. But again, we would always base it in not just consumer centricity, but the ability to be able to live with a condition and treat with a product that's going to produce a better solution for you. So again, it may be longevity of life, it might be a lifestyle change to your point, but ultimately, you're keeping the patient at the center of what you're doing and really giving them that hope that we're all here to provide.
Yeah, if you look at, it's a little bit of a false binary between patient marketing versus advocacy. They work hand in hand if they sort of think about it as a continuum. And if you just think about rare disease in the US, depending on your data source, it's anywhere from 7,000 to 10,000 different rare diseases in the US. So rare disease is 200,000 or less. But yeah, resist this urge to go in with being the savior for this population with these great products that you may have.
It's interesting when you start to talk, because one of the things we got into is the spread of generations on the planet. And in healthcare, it's about trust, but there's a growing distrust of big pharma. And if you look at Gen Z versus boomers, Gen Z is all about a vibe. They could be like, well, your drug marketing is not a vibe for me. I can't make this stuff up, people. So between Gen Z, millennials, Gen Xers, and boomers, that's a wide stratosphere of who wants to get on the frame and not. And I think, Myles, one of the things we talked about was, you mentioned identity. And the younger generation is more apt to do psychedelics, CBD, a wellness camp. They'll come up the skytop where the cell phone signal drops off to unplug. It's just very different. They're not adapt to a pill-popping culture. So in a nonlinear patient journey, where does that leave us in terms of the position we start talking about the trust or distrust that exists amongst 4 generations that are pushing and pulling in this category?
Yeah, this is not an easy solve, but probably sort of think about the democratization of information. Let's start at the positive, small d. So whether you are prescribed to sort of a Mad Max dystopian view of the world with all of this information, or maybe you're more of a sort of Star Trek fan and sort of like the positivities of technology is going to be utopian world that we all live in. The reality is we're somewhere in between. Right. And so if we sort of apply those to the different demographics, and we go back to sort of our parents or grandparents' generation and the difference to the white coat and really listening to the doctors know all the answers. They're just going to tell me what I need to do, and I'm good to go. And you flip that to the much younger generations, and you find data, which is this interesting thing, right? We all know that 80% of patients are on social media looking for answers. Yet it's 70+% have this view of distrust of information on social media. So we have a high consumption of information on social media balanced with, yeah, but I don't really believe in the information I get on social media. But I'd still prefer to hear it from somebody that kind of looks and sounds like me and has my sort of lifestyle. So the reality for us as marketers is figuring out, look, we're not going to be able to solve the disinformation world that's out there, but perhaps our obligation is to tackle at least the misinformation side of it. So those sort of like white hat, not purposely trying to set false information, but information as best they know. So how do we help educate on that? But you have to go where people are and understand the tone of the channel that is on that channel. And all channels have a set of personas, whatever channel it is you're looking at. Understand that persona, understand the persona then of the individuals on that channel, and then how do you tackle your messages that way?
Yeah, and Bill, one of the things you talked about was playing in the space where you have the greatest control and control of the narrative. So maybe the 80% of consuming in social, but 70% distrust isn't it. Offer us some like perspective when you guys are looking at, yeah, but you may want to do this because this is popular or what your competitor is doing. But these are the spaces where you have more control of the conversation.
Yeah, we tend to, I think, focus on trying to jam all of our messages into every single piece of creative that we put into market. So it's just figuring out a way to break apart that message arc and utilize the channel for what its purpose truly is and the tone that Myles mentioned. So, with distrust, I wouldn't put all of my trustworthy information on social because it's likely not being seen or not likely being engaged with. And again, I think this goes to the oversaturation piece of the panel, which is like, again, we try to oversaturate and try to do everything and be something for everyone in every single touch point. And marketing budgets are slim. So I think a lot of partners have a hard time understanding, well, why don't you just have unique creative for my specific execution? And brand marketers are like, I don't have enough money to create all of this stuff. And then agencies are like, wow, that scope's gonna be huge. We should create something for everyone, right? So there's so many conflicting things that are happening in our industry versus focusing, again, back onto the basics and taking that step back. What can I get out of this channel? What's going to be the thing that sings? And what's going to create the action that I'm ultimately looking for and the insight that's going to drive the next best action for that patient or physician? That's where I think we focus. That's where I focus a lot of my strategy with my clients on. I don't want to be something for everyone. We can't help all patients, but we need to figure out how do we fine-tune our strategy and actually push towards impact.
Yeah, there's just kind of 3 salient points. Nuggets that you should walk away. It's really insightful from Bill's comments there. One, message mapping. You should go back to the basics of marketing and understanding what is your message map. Your message map is going to help you then inform what part of that message goes on what channel. 2, do not try to have your entire brand product story in one message, in one creative, and jam it all in there, and then amplify that across every single channel. 3, just focus on what is the problem you're trying to solve, and then what piece of that message is going to help it. And related to that is let go of our foundational education and marketers as linear patient journeys. They do not exist, particularly in rare and ultra-rare. It is iterative, constantly going 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So understand those 3 things: nonlinear journeys, message maps, and connections of message maps to channel with not every single full story in every channel, and you should be quite successful.
I love it. That was a great end cap. He closed it out better than me. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give them a round of applause for the discussion.
Good job.
I think we're going to open it up for questions for a couple minutes.
Hey guys, Matthew Van Ernest from OpenX here. I'd love to hear some specific examples of where you chased after a FOMO strategy, incorrectly, and then like how and what you pivoted to that worked better.
I would say when we first began looking at, and this is going back several years, even before my current company, when we first started looking at social media, it was very much a case of let's use our sort of traditional model of, sort of display ads that we've created. They have clear call to actions, so on and so forth, and let's just put that into a handful of social channels, the Metas, Instagrams, whatever, and then it's going to work really well. And what we found is, yes, you can have a lot of sort of vanity engagements, but what was the problem we were trying to solve? And so one of the things that we looked at was going back and saying, actually, one of the things we're trying to do, particularly in this example that I'm giving was an ultra-rare disease, was we had what we thought was a pretty good understanding of the disease and the attitude and the perception of the disease for both patients and HCPs. But what we focused on was specifically creating a simple quiz and then deploying a quiz into social media and then gathering insights from the quiz. And what we learned from the quiz was that our campaigns were slightly off. And so we had to go back and rejigger our campaigns. But the other key part of that quiz was a follow-up to drive into our CRM programs. And we saw a 300% increase in enrollments in our CRM programs. Now that got to our previous discussion around, now we can start thinking about the message mapping and the full story of the brand, and then start nurturing those relationships over time, telling those pieces of the story.
Thank you.
Hi, Lauren from MIQ. I wanted to know if any of you have, as we talk about oversaturation and the message and meeting the consumer and 5 generations across one drug, have any of you had any experience with social influencers for healthcare, whether it's consumer-focused or doctor-focused?
Sure. So when I was on the brand side, we were competing against the #1 product in the market. We came in at a strong #2. They had a very strong influencer campaign, and it kind of answers the other question of having FOMO because we felt left out. So we started down this path of trying to build a community of influencers and figure out ways to engage with them and what would be the value transfer, and then ultimately what would we get back, right? So what would be the data or the input that would then provide an action? It never really panned out for the brand, and I think partly because the #1 brand kind of dominated the market with influencers, so we were left to having a spokesperson who was very famous, helped to represent the campaign, and that helped to drive some of the activity that we were ultimately looking for, and she acted as our influencer in many ways, and we were able to parse out different pieces of content. But there's a lot of partners in the ecosystem, right, of media that have influencer capabilities that are very well established and have integrity with patient communities. So we were able to kind of tap into their networks and then drive, cohesion with their messaging and the way that they're engaging. So we kind of pivoted very quickly instead of spending a ton of money on trying to build something that was very grassroots, and it was kind of like second fiddle to something that was already in market. I feel like everyone's tried it at this point, and I think that what we're finding is that there's not a lot of activity at the output, right? We can't really take a lot of the influencer engagement and actually action on it much further, because they don't technically work for us. So it leaves brands kind of in this like weird position of like, I want to do it because I don't want FOMO, but also too, do I have the right resources and am I going to get the right thing out of it in order to show that it's actually providing impact to the brand?
Yeah, and I'll give one example. It was on the consumer health side, using search-enhanced CTV that led to creators. The search-enhanced targeting company was able to pull apart audience types. One was aging women, drier skin. Ones were athletes, high performers that need to sort of rehydrate the skin post-campaign. And the other one was just in the wellness category. So the client picked influencers who were like yoga instructors, wellness people, and then they picked actually Gabby Douglas, the former Olympic gymnast, who represented a high-performing athlete who needed to replenish because they had relationships. So they used signals from one media type to define audience segments, to find a creator to put out in front of that particular segment to address that part of the market conversation. And this brand was a competitor to CeraVe, Cetaphil, dermatology-backed. But the idea is it wanted to leverage people who had high credibility or experts in play. And I think the lesson was, don't just pick them for the sake of picking them. Look at other types of marketing you have in play that's giving you the signal that this is an audience that will respond to a creator or super influencer and move behind them. I think there's too much just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks, and there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times in the marketing mix, if you pull apart the information, it's not observation, but that's impacts execution, the information is there. Consumers are always signaling and telling you what to do. People just don't want to look at it. They want to do what's most popular, or as we said, what the competitor is doing.
Yeah, I think influencers, this is a sort of our de facto is when we say influencers, we're thinking on the patient side. I think you also have influencers on the HCP side, right? So KOL. So I think it's stepping back and answering this fundamental question. What are you trying to influence on? Whether it's on the HCP or the patient side. And ultimately, both of those have to be unified. And the other thing I would consider is the sort of the influencer celebrity model, right? Is that the sort of the top sort of macro view of, to Bill's point, right, where a lot of folks get into the FOMO, oh, we need to have a macro level influencer. I would say that depending on your brand, you may want to be considering meso level or micro levels. And there's information out there, not just raw data, that shows that at that micro level, you can actually be more impactful with your campaigns if you don't get sort of over enamored with like, I need to make sure I have a big influencer because everybody else is doing it.
All right, well, gentlemen, thank you for your time.